There's a kind of silence that doesn't belong in the woods. I've lived in Skyline, Alabama for most of my life, and I've walked those Appalachian trails more times than I can count. I know the smells, the sounds, the sharp call of a hawk overhead, the constant drone of cicadas, the rustling underbrush of deer or rabbit. But that morning, when I set out in my red hoodie for a short hike, the forest wasn't just quiet. It was dead. No birdsong, no buzzing, not even the wind whistled through the trees, just the crunch of my boots against fallen leaves and the strange pressure in my ears, like the world had taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. I paused at a fork in the trail, wiping sweat from my brow. It was early autumn, the kind of day that danced on the edge of warmth and chill. I took the left path, one less traveled, deeper into the foothills. I wasn't worried. I'd hiked it before. Hell, I grew up running through these woods. I knew where I was. Or, I thought I did. It started with a sudden vertigo. One step forward, and my vision swam. I staggered sideways, catching myself on a tree. Then everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on my back in total darkness. At first, I thought I'd gone blind. My hands scraped across rock, cold, damp, uneven. The air was still and heavy, smelling of earth and rot. I fumbled for my phone. The screen lit up, the pale glow revealing a low ceiling of rough stone inches above my face. I was underground. No sound, no breeze, just darkness and the low pulse of panic building in my chest. The last thing I remembered was standing in the woods, and then waking up here. I didn't fall. There was no cave entrance on that trail, no sign, no slope. Just one wrong step, and then nothing. I turned on my phone's flashlight and began crawling forward. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for me to move. I dragged myself through the darkness, heart pounding in my ears. After a few minutes, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and I staggered to my feet. That's when I saw them. Clothes scattered all over the cave floor, torn jackets, crumpled boots, a child's backpack with a cracked plastic buckle, all faded, dirty, and red. Every item was some shade of red, a scarf, a raincoat, even a pair of crimson gloves, crusted with something brown and dry. And in the far corner, God help me, there was a body. It was slumped against the wall, half covered in debris. Bones poked through decayed fabric. The skull lolled sideways, jaw open as if frozen mid-scream. Its shirt, tattered and barely clinging to the frame, was a vibrant red flannel. I staggered backward, nearly dropping my phone. That's when I heard it. A faint, echoing giggle. A child's laugh, high-pitched and distant, like it was bouncing off the cave walls. I spun in a circle. "Hello?" My voice sounded weak, lost in the darkness. "Is someone there?" Another laugh, closer this time. Then came the whisper. "Help, me." It sounded like a little girl, but the tone was wrong, not scared, not pleading, mocking. I turned off my flashlight. I don't know why. Maybe I thought the dark would hide me. Maybe I hoped the voice would vanish if I didn't acknowledge it. Either way, I crouched behind a rock and held my breath. Something shuffled in the tunnel behind me. A soft scraping, like skin against stone. Then silence. I stayed there for what felt like hours, heart thudding, every muscle screaming. When I finally dared to peek over the rock, the chamber was empty again. I turned the light back on and saw that the body in the corner had moved. Its head was now turned toward me. The red flannel shirt was missing. No footsteps, no dragging sound. Just gone. And worse still, my red hoodie was lying on the cave floor a few feet away, as if something had undressed me while I was unconscious. I never felt more naked in my life. I didn't stop to think. I ran deeper into the tunnels, away from the voice, away from the corpse. I marked the walls with gum wrappers and scratched arrows into the stone. My phone battery was down to 18%. I had no reception, no idea how deep I was. But I kept moving. Eventually the tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller this time, with stalactites hanging like fangs from the ceiling. A pool of dark water shimmered in the center. On the far wall, something was scratched into the stone in what looked like charcoal. "Don't wear red." Next to it, smeared and half erased, were handprints. I sat against the wall, trying to slow my breathing. My fingers shook as I checked my phone again. 12%. No signal. I opened the camera and took a photo of the writing, proof I wasn't hallucinating. Then the giggle came again, closer than before. But it didn't echo this time. It came from behind me. I spun, but nothing was there. Except the wall wasn't solid anymore. There was a shape blending with the rock. A figure, tall, thin, barely visible, like smoke molded into a person. It shifted when I stared at it, almost crawled across the stone. Then it whispered again. "You shouldn't have worn red." I ran. There was no other choice, not when that thing, that shadow person, peeled itself from the cave wall and grinned at me. Its smile wasn't made of teeth, but of suggestion, like a lipless skull dreaming of hunger. The closer I looked, the harder it was to define its edges, like it wasn't fully part of this world. It rippled like heat off pavement, nearly transparent, but unmistakably aware of me. And it moved fast. I took off down the nearest tunnel, my phone's dying light bouncing off jagged walls and puddles of stagnant water. My breathing came in harsh gasps, my boots slipping on the slick stone. Behind me, the scuttling sounds returned, quick and sharp, like fingernails tapping at the world. My only thought was, don't stop. I rounded a bend and nearly fell into a pit, an open shaft about 8 feet across, just wide enough to swallow me whole. I skidded to a stop, the momentum nearly sending me in. The beam from my flashlight showed a narrow stone ledge running along one side of the pit. I had no choice. I pressed my back against the wall and edged sideways, inch by inch, my boots skimming over a drop so deep my light couldn't find the bottom. Every shift sent pebbles skittering into the black, and each second I expected a cold hand to grab my ankle and yank. But nothing did. I made it across. And then I heard it. From the shaft below, dozens of whispering voices rose in unison, echoing my own name. Daniel. Soft. Slow. Mocking. I almost dropped the phone. Then silence again. No wind, no dripping water, just that suffocating stillness. I turned and ran deeper into the tunnel network. My thoughts were splintered. Some primal part of me wanted to scream, to punch through the stone and crawl toward daylight, but the rational part knew. If I didn't keep my head, I was dead. No, worse than dead, because something in these caves wanted me alive, at least for a little while. That's when I found the second chamber. It was larger than the last, and oddly symmetrical, like it had been carved intentionally. Markings covered the walls, charcoal drawings of figures in red clothing being torn apart by spindly shapes with glowing eyes. In one corner, stacked like a grim offering, were teeth. Human teeth. Hundreds of them, arranged in a spiral. In the center of the chamber was an old camping lantern, metal, dented but still intact. I clicked it on and nearly wept when it flickered to life, casting a steady yellow glow. I turned off my phone flashlight to save the battery, 6%. With the lantern's wider light, I could finally see the true horror of the cave walls. Not just drawings. Names, carved in desperate, frantic lines, some deep enough to break fingernails. Rebecca Owens, Tyler Smith, Maya Lane, Jesse Lorenzo, Maria. 100 names, maybe more, all surrounded by the same repeated phrase, "Don't wear red." I recognized one of the names. Maya Lane. She'd gone missing last year while hiking with her boyfriend a few counties over. They found his body halfway down a ravine, torn open like something had clawed through him. Hers was never recovered. Now I knew why. A sudden scraping sound came from the tunnel behind me. Not footsteps, not claws. Breathing. Shallow, gurgling, like a windpipe struggling to work. I doused the lantern and pressed myself into a corner, trying to silence the pounding of my heart. I could barely see, but in the faint afterglow of the lamp, I glimpsed a shape slither into the room. This one was different from the last. It was smaller, more human, like a child hunched over, dragging one foot. It wore what looked like a tattered red raincoat. The hood was up, but the face underneath. God help me. There was no face, just a stretched plane of skin where features should have been. As if someone had taken a child and melted its identity off like wax. It cocked its head slowly, like listening. Then it spoke, in a garbled, broken voice, "Wanna play hide and seek?" It wasn't a question, it was a command. The moment it turned its head, I bolted through the opposite tunnel, tripping over bones and scraps of cloth. It shrieked behind me, the sound rising like a boiling kettle, and I knew I had maybe seconds before it was on me. I burst into a new chamber and slammed the lantern onto the ground. The glass shattered, and the flare of heat and fire lit up the space in a blinding burst. The creature didn't follow. Instead, I heard the sound of many feet, not running, but scuttling, like a wave of insects crawling just out of sight. My vision blurred from smoke, and I could feel my lungs seizing. I pushed on, coughing, barely able to see. Finally, I reached a sloped tunnel that seemed to lead upward. Hope bloomed in my chest. Maybe this was it, an exit, or a shaft to daylight, anything. But halfway up, I collapsed. Exhaustion, blood loss from a gash I didn't remember getting, the heat, the smoke, the fear. I dragged myself to a corner and curled up, shivering. Before I passed out, I looked up at the stone ceiling. Carved there upside down were more words, "You're in their nest now." And below that, scratched so faintly I almost missed it, "Steel is the only way out." Then I heard the voice again, soft, female, and right next to my ear. "You should have listened to the trees." I woke to darkness again, but this time it wasn't empty. There were sounds now, faint clicking, distant footsteps that didn't sound human, breaths that weren't drawn through lungs, whispers that weren't made by mouths. I didn't move for a full minute. I lay perfectly still, blinking against the pitch. The only sign I was alive was the pounding in my head and the sticky warmth of blood where I'd scraped my leg raw, crawling through the tunnel. I dared not make a sound. Something was near. When I finally pushed myself up, I felt the tremor of movement through the stone beneath me. Not a quake. Something walking, something heavy. It moved slow, deliberate. I waited until the tremor passed before lighting the weak LED on my phone again. 4% battery left. I didn't have long. The tunnel I'd collapsed in was unlike the rest. The walls weren't rough-cut limestone anymore. They were smoothed out, almost polished. I ran my fingers along the surface. There were grooves, not tool marks, but claw marks. Dozens, if not hundreds, some shallow, others deep enough to suggest furious scraping. That's when I noticed the smell. Rot, but not natural decay. This was worse, like spoiled meat that had been breathed on for too long. Like breath itself had turned rancid. It clung to the air. I moved forward, careful not to scuff my boots too loudly. Every step echoed in ways it shouldn't have. Like I wasn't just being watched, I was being followed by something that walked behind time itself. Then the tunnel opened. The cavern was impossibly vast. My light barely touched its edges. Hundreds, maybe thousands of bones lined the floor, arranged in patterns that defied reason. Spirals, arcs, constellation-like shapes that felt deliberate. And above me, nestled like gargoyles along the ceiling and rock shelves, were them. The hollow folk. That's what I started calling them in my mind, because their bodies looked like abandoned suits of skin. Hollow, sagging slightly, features blurred or non-existent. Their mouths didn't move when they spoke. Their faces were barely faces at all, sunken indentations where eyes and noses should be, with flesh that shimmered like water at dusk. Some were small, child-sized. Others were massive, their limbs too long, spines curled unnaturally. One had arms that dragged behind it like roots from a drowned tree. They stared, unmoving, until one of them tilted its head and laughed. Not aloud, not through sound, it laughed in my mind. A cold, telepathic intrusion that filled my skull like an invasive fog. "You bleed." So brightly. My knees buckled. I dropped to the ground and crawled backward, holding up the only weapon I had, my multi-tool. The steel blade flicked out with a click. One of the hollow folk hissed at the sound, pulling back sharply. It hated the metal. I remembered the words scratched into the ceiling from earlier, "Steel is the only way out." My heart pounded with something close to hope. They feared it. Not completely, some were still inching closer, but enough to hesitate. That gave me time. I kept the blade out in front of me as I moved, weaving through the bone-filled chamber toward another tunnel. One of the creatures dropped from the ceiling, landing in a wet crouch a few yards from me. It wore a red beanie, soaked through and crusted in dried blood. Its legs were bent backward like an animal's. It twitched its neck and mimicked my voice perfectly. Please God, I just want to go home. My own voice, warped and cruel. I lunged at it with the blade. Not to kill, just to push it back. The second the steel came within inches of its skin, it shrieked like a boiling kettle and darted away, climbing a wall like a spider vanishing into the cracks. They wouldn't stop me from leaving, not while I had this. The tunnel ahead was narrower and darker. My light flickered, 3%. I moved quickly, counting each step, pressing my hand to the right wall so I wouldn't get turned around. Every few feet, I'd find more remnants. A hiking boot, a crushed thermos, a shredded red hoodie hanging like a flag of doom from a jagged rock. Red. Always red. Why? Was it the color? Or the life it symbolized? I remembered something from when I was a kid. My grandma used to say never whistle in the woods and never wear red near old trees. You'll invite the others, she said. I thought it was a story meant to scare me, but maybe she knew something. Maybe the old folks always knew. The tunnel narrowed again, and I was forced to crouch. That's when I saw it, scratched into the stone in shaky rust-colored strokes. They mimic, they collect, they hate steel. If you're reading this, it's already too late. Below that was a jagged arrow pointing up. And then, miracle of miracles, I felt it. Air, cold, fresh, real air brushing against my skin like salvation. It came from above. I climbed, scrambling up a rock slope, and emerged into another shaft. My light flickered once more, 2%, and then cut out. Total darkness again, but I could smell the forest. I climbed higher, nails cracking, the multi-tool blade clenched between my teeth. The tunnel ended in a tight stone cap, and above that, wooden slats. A trap door. I slammed my fists into it. Once, twice, again. It opened, and moonlight spilled down like water from heaven. I pulled myself up and out, gasping, flailing, feeling grass and dirt beneath my hands. I rolled out into a clearing and screamed. I was free, but no one came, just the wind in the trees. And silence. I sat up, trembling. The wooden hatch I'd climbed through was hidden beneath an old, rusted shed built into the side of a hill. An unmarked spot, far from any trail. There were no signs, no warnings. Just one faint mark carved into the door, a spiral made of teeth. Then, from the woods behind me, I heard it again. A child's voice, soft and giggling. Tag, you're it. I didn't run. I wanted to sprint through the trees until I reached pavement, people, anything. But my legs wouldn't move. The sound of that voice, light and cheerful like a playground chant, had locked me in place. Tag, you're it. It came from the same direction I had crawled from. The rusted shed behind me yawned open like a mouth, moonlight glinting off something just below the lip. Teeth. Or things arranged like teeth, tiny bones, glistening and perfectly spaced around the hatch. I clutched my multi-tool tighter, its steel blade smeared with dried blood and dirt. I wanted to believe it was protection, but I felt like a child clutching a plastic sword in a real war. The woods were wrong now. The trees swayed, but there was no wind. The air was humid and warm, despite the cool mountain night. And worst of all, there were no sounds, no crickets, no owls, no rustling, just the memory of that sing-song voice fading into the tree line. I took a cautious step backward, then another. The crunch of leaves under my boots echoed too loud. That's when I noticed something else. Red. A strip of fabric fluttered on a nearby branch. It looked like a scarf or a torn piece of jacket. My breath caught in my throat. Another one. And another. Further ahead, a trail of red leading away from the shed. I didn't follow it. I wasn't that stupid, but my brain was splitting between two competing instincts, run or hide. Then I heard the next voice. Help me, please. I'm so cold. It was my voice. I turned sharply, aiming the useless, flickering phone light toward the sound. A figure stood just beyond the first row of trees, slumped, head tilted, wearing a red backpack. It took a step forward and its leg bent in the wrong direction. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran. Through the forest, past briar and root, thorns catching on my arms and legs. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew what I was running from. Behind me, something thudded against the trees. Heavy, scraping sounds, breath like steam bursting from a cracked pipe. I ran until I hit a fence. Chain link, rusted, barbed at the top. Beyond it, I saw the shimmer of moonlight on metal, a road sign, civilization. I climbed. My hand caught the top and tore open. Blood smeared across the steel, and as I dropped down on the other side, I heard them scream, a chorus of shrieks, not pain, not anger, hunger. They couldn't follow, not yet. I collapsed just off the roadside, panting and shaking. Somewhere below, a pair of headlights approached, a truck maybe. I stumbled into the middle of the road. The truck braked hard, tires screeched. The driver, a bearded man in his 60s, climbed out, shotgun in hand. Jesus Christ, boy, you trying to die out here? I fell to my knees. Help me, I rasped. They're still down there. The man didn't ask questions. He looked me over, saw the blood, the dirt, the terror written all over me. Then he nodded. Come on. In the truck, I tried to explain. He just drove in silence, eyes locked on the dark road ahead. After a long minute, he said, You were near Skyline, weren't you? I nodded. He sighed. Should have known. They always come back hungry when the moon's high. What the hell are they? Before we move on, please donate me in the form of subscribe. He glanced at me. You ever hear of the Hollow Folk? I didn't answer. He went on. Old legend. Long before white men settled here, used to be that the Cherokee warned folks about them. Said the Hollow Folk lived under the mountains, took people that strayed too far, especially if they wore red. I swallowed hard. Why red? He shrugged. Color of life, maybe. Or maybe it's just a call to them, like blood on snow. They don't like being seen, but they love to collect. I touched the torn gash in my hand. Steel. They hate steel. Why? That's older than even the stories. Some say steel was forged to bind them. Others say it's because steel don't come from nature. It's man-made, fire-born. It cuts where nothing else can. Whatever the reason, you're lucky you had it. We pulled into a clearing with a cabin at the edge of the woods. He helped me inside, bandaged my hand, poured me a cup of thick black coffee that smelled like burnt cedar. As I sat, I asked him the question that had been eating at me since I climbed out of that hole. How many others? He didn't meet my eyes. Too many. Most don't come back. Some do, but they're not right anymore. Why hasn't anyone shut that place down? Warned people? He snorted. You think folks haven't tried? That old shed's been burned down half a dozen times, always comes back. Sometimes not even in the same spot. That thing moves, like it's got a will of its own. I stared into the steaming cup. There was a kid, I said. The voice sounded like a little girl. She said, Tag, you're it. The man's face went pale. She picked you, he whispered. What? The Hollow Folk don't just hunt at random. They mark people. They want you to come back. That's how they get more. You ever feel like you're being watched now, even outside? I nodded slowly. He stood up and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a long hunting knife. Its blade was thick, gleaming, and etched with symbols I didn't recognize. Keep this with you at all times, he said. You ever hear a voice that sounds like your own or someone you love? Don't listen. Don't talk back. Don't follow. I took the knife. What happens if I do? He paused, then said, almost a whisper, You'll find your way back to the spiral, and once you step inside willingly, you never leave again. That night I couldn't sleep. Every shadow seemed to whisper, every tree branch outside the window looked like fingers. And I knew, deep down, that they hadn't finished with me. Not yet. It's been 3 weeks since I escaped the woods near Skyline. 3 weeks since I heard my own voice echoing back at me from the trees. And 3 weeks since I realized some things don't just stay in the mountains. They follow you home. I haven't slept more than 2 hours a night. Every time I close my eyes, I dream of tunnels. Of the spiraling descent, of thin fingers tapping against stone, of red scarves caught in roots, and always, just before I wake, I hear her voice again. Tag, you're it. The knife the old man gave me, Rudy, that's his name, hasn't left my side. I sleep with it under my pillow, shower with it on the sink, even keep it beside me when I eat. It makes me feel almost safe. But lately I'm not sure it's enough. Because they're here. I know how that sounds. I do. I've gone over every possible explanation, paranoia, trauma, even some kind of hallucinogenic mold in the cave. But I've started noticing things I can't explain. It began subtly. The apartment felt colder than it should, even in late spring. I started hearing soft creaks under the floorboards at night, like someone crawling slowly. My neighbors above me. They moved out last month. Then came the voices. They'd start faintly, behind the bathroom mirror, inside a vent, beneath the bed. At first I thought it was just echoes from outside. But then I heard my mom's voice. She's been dead for 5 years. Come home, baby, it's safe now. One night I sat in the dark, holding the knife and waited. Around 3:17 a.m., the coat closet door opened on its own. I swear I'd locked it. But it swung out slowly, the hinge squealing. From inside I heard giggling, childlike, playful. I didn't move, I barely breathed. A red mitten rolled out across the floor. I threw the knife at it. The blade clanged off the hardwood, the mitten was gone. Just gone. The next morning I drove back to Rudy's cabin. I didn't call, I just showed up. When he opened the door and saw the look on my face, he didn't even ask. He stepped aside and let me in. I told him everything, the voices, the mitten, the cold. When I finished, he nodded grimly. They've marked you deep. Doesn't surprise me. You bled on steel. That's old blood magic. Goes both ways. They hate it, but they can use it too. Use it how? To find you, to twist what's familiar. You ever wonder why you heard your own voice in that cave? Or your mother's now? I didn't answer. They don't know who we are, he continued. Not really. But when you open that door, when you hear them and listen, they learn. They learn how to wear your memories like skin. I shuddered. There's got to be a way to stop it, I said, to make it go away. He studied me for a long moment, then said, maybe. But it won't be easy. He led me to a trunk at the back of his cabin. Inside were objects that didn't belong in this century, a rusted compass that spun endlessly, a doll with no eyes, a map of the Appalachian region with dozens of red X's. Each of these marks is a place someone disappeared. Most were never found. A few came back, like you. Marked, haunted. He handed me the map. The spiral isn't just a cave, it's part of a network, a system of doors. Some are deep in the woods, others show up where they shouldn't. Abandoned buildings, mine shafts, even closets. Like my coat closet. He nodded. If you want to stop this, you have to seal the door, wherever they're coming from. That means confronting them, on their ground. You're saying I have to go back. I'm saying you're not the first, but maybe you can be the last. He reached into his trunk again and pulled out something else. A pendant shaped like an iron spiral, blackened with age. Wear this. It's old Cherokee ironwork. Found it near a site where folks say the hollow folk tried to rise once. They didn't get far. I took it with trembling hands. There's a place not far from Skyline, an old firewatch tower near Hawks Bend. One of the earliest disappearances came from there. Hiker went missing in 1952. Never found. Locals say her tent was torn open from below. I felt bile rise in my throat. I'll go, I said. Tonight. Rudy looked surprised but nodded. Then I'll go with you. Least until the edge of their reach. After that, you're on your own. We left that evening. I brought the knife, the pendant, my flashlight, and a steel pry bar Rudy insisted I carry. He brought a Remington shotgun loaded with iron slugs. As we drove into the mountains, dusk painted the trees crimson and gold. The further we got, the less signal I had. My phone died just outside the tree line near Hawks Bend. Just like before, we parked at the edge of an old ranger path. The trail was overgrown, unused for decades. Our boots crunched over bones. Raccoon, maybe. Deer. Something bigger, too. At the top of the trail was the tower, or what was left of it. The wooden steps had rotted. The cabin at the top leaned at an unnatural angle, like it had been twisted by unseen hands. A cold wind blew through the trees, though none of them moved. Rudy stopped and handed me a flare. "Once you're inside, light this when you're ready. If the spiral appears, that's your door." Won't they see me coming? They already know. They've been waiting. I climbed the tower alone. Every creak of wood beneath my feet sounded like a scream. Inside, the cabin was empty except for a circular metal hatch in the center of the floor. And around it, in chalk, a spiral. I struck the flare. The hatch creaked open, and the darkness below breathed. I dropped the flare into the yawning hatch. Its fiery arc traced a fleeting spiral before it vanished into the darkness. A low exhalation of stale air washed up the shaft and carried a tingle of sulfur, of decay, then receded like a predator testing its prey. "Go," Rudy hissed from above. The weak beam of his shotgun light vanished down the hole. I swallowed, weighted by dread and resolve. My fingers wrapped around the iron spiral pendant at my throat, cold and oddly comforting. I planted my feet on the ladder rung and descended. The walls were smoother here, polished by centuries of unseen scraping. My steel pry bar tapped against the stone as I climbed, echoing and drawing every nearby thing's attention. At about 20 feet down, the ladder ended and I dropped onto a ledge slick with moisture. I extended the pry bar like a walking stick and edged forward. The chamber opened before me like a cathedral. An immense dome arched overhead, stalactites dripping relentless tears of calcite. The floor was littered with bones, deer antlers, fractured human femurs, the hilt of a rusted knife. In the center sat a shallow depression filled with dark water, its surface as still as obsidian. All around, carved into the stone floor, was a spiral identical to the one above, only vast, 100 feet across. At its heart lay a twisted mass of red fabric. Dozens of hoodies, scarves, gloves, like gruesome petals on a nightmarish flower. I swallowed hard and waited. My phone lay dead in my pocket. The flare died in a hiss. The only light was a faint phosphorescent glow from lichen on the far walls. My breath frosted in the chill. A movement at the spiral's periphery caught my eye. Shadow curled into shape, one of the hollow folk, perched on a stalagmite, its limbs knotted and thin, skin stretched tight. Where its face should have been was nothing but a smooth, pale plane. I raised the pry bar. It rattled against the floor, and the creature's head snapped toward me. Then, graceful, too quick, it flashed down and folded into the cave's gloom. Rudy's shotgun cracked, loud enough to rattle the dome. The sound tore at my chest. A second later, dozens of echoing blasts answered it from unseen corners, steel slugs hitting flesh, tearing. Something shrieked, a sound like grinding metal, then silence. I bolted across the spiral, each step ringing hollow. The water lapped at my boots. I stumbled and nearly fell, but straightened and ran. From the darkness beyond the spiral, dozens of glowing eyes blinked open, like embers fed to the night. Creatures of every size parted to let something larger pass. A towering hollow folk, nearly 10 feet tall, its arms draped like vines. It exhaled through me, a rasping gust that smelled of mildew. My legs locked. "Steel!" I yelled, drawing the pry bar like a spear. I thrust it forward. The bar slammed into its thigh with a clang that echoed like a tolling bell. The thing recoiled, shrieking, and I felt the warmth of its breath on my face as it staggered away. That was my cue. I sprinted to Rudy's position, shouting into the darkness, but no answer came, only the soft drip of water and distant clicking. I yanked out the flare from my belt, its wick had smoldered to charcoal, and struck it against the stone wall. It burst into light, painting the cave in angry amber. There, ragged and bleeding, Rudy lay on a shelf of rock, clutching his shotgun. He'd fired every round. His coat was torn, his face smeared with sweat and dust. I dropped to my knees. "Rudy," I whispered. He tried to reply, but his voice was a gurgle. His eyes, sharp as ever, found mine. They're closing in," he croaked. He reached into his coat and produced a bundle of steel nails wrapped in cloth. "Nails? Iron nails. Drive them into the spiral. It seals the door." My heart hammered. I will. He coughed. No, you have to do it while I hold them back. His eyes darted to the darkness. Hurry. I stood on shaking legs and crossed back to the great spiral. Every footstep scattered bones and debris. The beasts were stirred now, whimpers panting, a sponge of hunger soaking the air. I found the spiral's innermost curve and pounded a nail into the stone with the butt of the pry bar. Pain flared in my palm as the iron bit into rock. A high-pitched whine rose from the creatures, distant but urgent. Nail after nail I drove, a dozen, then 2 dozen. Each steel spike seemed to scream, and the cave shook as though the world outside had been knocked. The creatures' shrieks crescendoed, then abruptly ceased. Silence fell like a weight pressing on my chest. I turned to run back to Rudy, but the flare guttered and died. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Panic ignited my lungs. "Rudy!" I shouted into the black. His voice answered, faint and strained. "Go! Go now!" Before a shape lunged out of the gloom, I raised the pry bar and slammed it into what I thought was its chest, only 2 slashes of grotesque flesh. It was Rudy. His coat, his shotgun, his eyes. He stepped out of the darkness and collapsed. His final words were a gasp. "Finish it, please." Fear and grief warred in my mind. The creatures remained silent now, their hunger paused. I realized their eyes, glowing faintly, were trained on the spiral. I understood. If the nails held, the door would seal. If not, they'd swarm me here, and the spiral would become a tomb. I swallowed bile and bent to hammer the final nail, my own blood coating it, from the pouch Rudy had trusted me with. I drove it down. The iron bit with a screech, and a wave of vibration pulsed through the stone floor. A low rumble followed, and the cave exhaled. A breath of wind and distant thunder. Then all was still. I stumbled back to the ladder, cradling Rudy's lifeless body, tears streaking bone-white dust from my face. The spiral behind me lay broken and stained, but sealed. I climbed, each rung a prayer. When I broke the surface, the night air felt solid, alive. I collapsed beside the shed, clutching the pendant, clutching life itself. The forest was silent once more, but as I looked back at the hillside, I thought I saw the shed's door close, just for a heartbeat, like a trapdoor slipping shut. I don't know if it's done. I don't know if the nails will hold forever, but I do know one thing. They always come back. It's been 3 months since I escaped the caves beneath the Appalachian Ridge near Skyline, Alabama. I wish I could say things have returned to normal, that the forest has healed, that the creatures have vanished, and that the spiral remains sealed beneath rock and time, but I'd be lying, because they're still watching me. Every night I see the same spiral in my dreams. Spinning, endless, painted in red, made of bones and teeth and fabric. And I wake up choking on the scent of damp stone and iron. I left Skyline the morning after the incident, carried Rudy's body through half a mile of bramble and frost until I flagged down a ranger truck on Route 72, told them he'd slipped into a sinkhole while we were hiking. I gave them a false name, burned everything I wore that night, including the red undershirt that had soaked through with his blood. They never found the shed. Or maybe they did and chose not to say anything. Either way, the next day, an article popped up online. Forest section temporarily closed due to unstable terrain. No mention of bodies, no mention of strange creatures, and definitely no mention of Rudy's field notes or the hollow-eyed monsters that hunted sound and color and memory. But I know what I saw, I know what's out there. And last night I saw it again. It started when I returned to my apartment in Birmingham. Life, as they say, moved on. I got a job bussing tables at a little Italian place, tried not to talk too much. Stayed away from wooded areas, avoided anything red. I wrapped my iron pendant in leather and never took it off. But the shadows still crawled. At night I'd catch flickers in the corners of my eyes, shapes that moved like smoke, then vanished. More than once I found faint spirals drawn in the dust on my windowsill or etched lightly into the frost on my windshield. I told myself it was stress, trauma, grief. I drank too much and didn't sleep enough. I stopped going out after dark. And then I heard the voice again. It was the child's voice, the same one I'd heard in the woods, echoing through the trees. Only this time it came from beneath the floorboards of my apartment. It whispered my name. I bolted. Didn't even lock the door. I drove 2 hours straight, back towards Skyline. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Closure. Confirmation that the seal was still intact. Or maybe some part of me just needed to see it again to know I hadn't lost my mind. I parked off a fire road around midnight and hiked through the brittle woods, flashlight and pry bar in hand. My breath plumed in the cold air, and not a single bird chirped. The shed was still there, unchanged. No signs of weathering, same door, same broken boards, same rusted handle. Only one thing was different. A red scarf hung from the door, tied in a perfect bow. I didn't touch it. I backed away slowly and circled the perimeter. The earth felt softer now, looser, like something underneath had been moving. When I pressed my ear to the ground, I heard it, scraping, clawing, tapping. The nails were loosening. I ran back to my car, half tripping down the hill, and drove into town. I found a motel and locked myself in for the night. Sat in the bathtub with the lights on and the pry bar across my lap. That's when I opened Rudy's notebook again, the one I'd grabbed from his pack before I left the cave. I hadn't dared read it until now. The last entry was hastily scrawled and stained with blood. The spiral is older than the mountains, maybe older than time. They come up every few decades, hunting, collecting. Red draws them, steel repels, but it doesn't kill, only delays. They hate iron because it reminds them of before they ruled, before the deal. If the nails fall, they come back. And next time they won't be trapped. They'll walk among us. The mark keeps them away, for now. Below the entry was a crude sketch of the iron pendant, the same spiral within a circle I now wore around my neck. But next to it was something else, something I hadn't seen before. Another symbol, a vertical slash crossed by two horizontal lines, like an old rune. No explanation, just a note. If they find you, mark your door in blood. I didn't sleep that night. This morning I returned to my apartment, expecting damage. But the place was pristine, almost too pristine. No dust on the counters, no crumbs on the carpet. My iron pendant was gone, just the broken chain where I'd hung it on the bathroom hook. And on the mirror, written in a red, oily smear, was a message. Why did you leave the door open? My hands trembled, my legs almost gave out. I packed what I could and left. Again. I'm writing this from a library computer outside Chattanooga. My plan is simple. Finish this story, get it out there. Let people know the truth. Maybe someone out there knows more. Maybe someone can stop them. But I don't have much time. Because when I reached into my duffel bag earlier to grab my jacket, it was gone. The red one. The one I swore I burned. In its place was a bundle of nails, wrapped in Rudy's handkerchief, and beneath it, a single spiral drawn in dirt on the bottom of the bag. Spinning. Waiting. Final note, if you've read this far, please listen carefully. Don't wear red in the Appalachian Mountains. Don't follow strange voices in the woods. Don't ignore spirals carved into the ground. And above all else, keep steel close. You never know when the hollow folk will return, because they are still there, and the nails won't hold forever. Before we move on, please donate me in the form of subscribe.